So, in the time period 1648 to 1815, England is going to become the biggest deal there is in Europe. So in this video for AP Euro Unit 5, we need to figure out how they did it. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So the first way England became the big cheese in Europe was by uniting under one monarchical banner with Scotland. The Acts of Union were passed both by the English and the Scottish parliaments in 1707, and that created a new entity called the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Now, a few years later, by 1715, the Treaty of Utrecht was signed, which ended the War of Spanish Succession. Now, we've talked about that in other videos, so I won't go into it here. But essentially, that war left France, the Dutch Republic, and Spain gasping for breath and seriously weakened economically. And that was great for Britain, because France, especially France, was Britain's chief rival during this time. And with France busy figuring out their own problems, Britain became arguably the most powerful state in Europe. But you didn't think the rivalry between Britain and France was over now, did you? You're so crazy. Not even close. So now I need to introduce you to the second means by which Great Britain became so powerful, and that was because of the 7 Years' War, which technically lasted 6 years, 8 months, 4 weeks, and a day, but that's not as snappy of a title as the 7 Years' War. So first, let's put this conflict in context. Recall that Frederick II of Prussia, also known as Frederick the Great, had seized the Austrian territory of Silesia, and in that act sparked the War of Austrian Succession, which lasted from 1740 to 1748. And because of alliances between European states, this quickly became a much bigger war that also included Britain and France, who seized much of each other's territory across their colonial empires. Now, by the end of the war, the peace treaty stipulated that all that territory seized be returned to their original owners. But Frederick II of Prussia refused to return Silesia to Austria, a move which virtually guaranteed another war. So because of the lingering tension over Silesia, Maria Theresa, the Austrian monarch, established new diplomatic alliances and broke apart old ones. And with this new system of alliances formed, the stage was set for the 7 Years' War, which would be waged in Europe, India, and North America, which is why some historians argue that it was truly the First World War. So let's consider each of the theaters of war, and that'll help you see how Britain came out on top. First was the European theater. The fighting in Europe centered in Prussia, who was allied with Great Britain, and though Frederick II fought pretty decently, he was surrounded on 3 sides by Austrians, Russians, and the French. But Frederick's bacon was saved by the ascension of Peter III to the throne of Russia, who, being a greater admirer of Frederick, dude, I love you, called off Russian troops. And by 1763, all parties in the war were exhausted and ceased fighting, while Austria relinquished claims over Silesia. So in terms of Great Britain's ascendancy, the European theater, it didn't do much for them. But now let's consider the South Asian theater of war in India. Britain and France struggled mightily for control over India. France had seized Madras in the War of Austrian Succession, and that was a big deal because Madras was the center of British imperial control in India. But as I mentioned earlier, the Treaty of Utrecht mandated that all the seized land be returned, and thus Madras returned to British control. But now as the conflict erupted again in the 7 Years' War, Britain and France began tangling once again over India. Now they did this mainly by supporting rival Indian princes, but ultimately the British won out and the French withdrew from India, leaving Britain in control. So Britain has India, and that puts a big fat check in the British ascendancy column. But the most decisive victory for the British in the 7 Years' War was in the North American theater, and there the conflict was known as the French and Indian War. So the Prime Minister of Britain, William Pitt the Elder, understood that the greatest impediment to the expansion of Britain's empire was the massive French colonial empire. Therefore, Pitt concentrated much of Britain's resources into this theater of war. It was called the French and Indian War because the French allied with North American Indians who saw the French traders as less a threat to their way of life than the British settlers, who just couldn't seem to satisfy their deep, gaping want holes with enough land. And so despite the early successes from the French, the British Navy ended up pounding them, and eventually the British won this conflict. And as a result of the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war, Britain gained a metric buttload of land from France's colonial empire, including large parts of Canada and all the land east of the Mississippi River. Additionally, Spain, who was France's ally in the war, ceded Florida to the British as well. And now that the 7 Years' War had come to an end, out of the smoking rubble, Britain became the world's greatest superpower. But you didn't think that Britain and France were done fighting, did you? It's so crazy. Nope, in 1776, Britain's North American colonies decided that they wanted independence, and that led to the American Revolution. Now remember, Britain is the world's most powerful nation at this time. Do you really think these fledgling little colonies stand a chance against those odds? The answer is no. There is no way that 13 British colonies are going to win against Britain. Oh, but here comes France to save the day. Yes, the American colonists were well aware of this long-lasting rivalry between Britain and France, and thus courted France to come help throw Britain off of its back. And look, France didn't help because they, read the Declaration of Independence and were like, "Oh my, our hearts beat fast at this call for liberty." It's not even a French accent. What was that? No, like an injured school child, they wanted revenge on Britain. And with France's help, the American colonies successfully defeated the British. But even so, that didn't much diminish the power of Great Britain. They were still the world's greatest superpower. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 5 of AP Euro. And if you need more help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then click right here and grab my AP Euro review pack, which will make all your dreams come true. I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.